Georgetown, which is about a mile away from the Nickel Mines Crossroad. Nickel Mines is not even a village, it's a crossroads in a very rural area. There are about a dozen houses there just along a road, but it's not really a village of any sort. And Georgetown, which is about a mile away, is a village, but probably doesn't have more than 300 people at the max. And Charlie lived in Georgetown. He was a bulk milk truck driver. He would go around to the farms with a big tank truck, stainless steel tank truck, and pump out the milk from the local farm dairies into his truck, take it to a dairy where the milk was processed. And his day would start typically 6 or 7 in the evening. He'd work through the night and then parked his truck actually in a large parking lot near the Nickel Mines Crossroad, typically about 2 or 3 in the morning, go back to his home and sleep. On this particular day, he was off from his job because he was supposed to get drug tested, or at least that's what he told his wife. And he and Marie had 3 children. They had a daughter that, their first daughter died about 8 or 9 years earlier and had lived just a few days. And then they had 3 additional children. The one was like a 1 or 2 year old child that was with Marie that morning. She went to a neighborhood church, Presbyterian women's prayer group that met once a month. And it was a group that had gathered to pray for the safety of children in public schools. And so she had taken the baby off with her, and Charlie put the other 2 kids on a school bus and kissed them goodbye. And I believe that the one was 7, the one was 9 at that. This back in 2006. He then went up to the Nickel Mines. Well, he went to an Amish hardware store after sending his kids off on the bus and bought Ziploc ties. It's, plumbers or electricians might use Ziploc ties where you can wrap a bundle of wires together and just pull it and it like holds. And purchased Ziploc ties, then came back to the crossroads at Nickel Mines, and this is about 10 o'clock, 10:15. But the children were out for recess at the West Nickel Mines School, and when you're at the crossroads, you can look down, it's about a 1/4 of a mile away into the valley and see the school. And so he waited at the corner of the Nickel Mines Crossroad. There's a small store there with a Coke machine. Got a Coke. Some Amish people remembered going by and seeing him there. And he waited until the children went back in from recess. Then he went down, he backed up. He had a pickup truck that was covered. It had an enclosed back on it. He backed up into the schoolyard up to the front of the school. Now, if that was the front of the school, then the blackboard is here. The seats are facing this way, but the actual entrance to the school is back there. So he came in from the back, talked to the teacher, said that he had lost a wrench, and he was making up a story. She didn't know it at that point. He had lost a wrench a couple of days ago and wondered if the kids had seen it or if she had seen it. And she said they hadn't, but she'd keep an eye out for it. He wanted to come in just kind of see the lay of the land, and then he went back to his truck, and then a few minutes later came in. He was armed with 3 weapons. He had an automatic pistol, a shotgun, and a rifle. And the records in his truck showed that he had been purchasing supplies over the last 2 weeks. So this is very premeditated. It was very deliberate and very systematic. He came in and he ordered everybody to get down. And at that point, the teacher made a quick decision to run for a telephone. Now, it happened on that day that her mother was there visiting, and 2 of her sister-in-laws, who were young married Amish women. So with the teacher, there were 4 adults. And she ran out, her desk was up here. The teacher ran out the side door. There's no telephones or cell phones in an Amish school. She ran out the side door. Her mother followed her out, and they ran about a quarter of a mile to a farm, an Amish farm, where they called 911. Meanwhile, the teacher's two sister-in-laws are there, and then he proceeds to order them, the two adults and the boys out. He just wanted them out of the building because he wanted to barricade himself in with the girls. One little girl escaped. Her brother went out. She was a first or second grader. She ran out with her brother. And then there were 10 young women left from first grade up through 7th or 8th grade, basically 6 to 14-year-olds. He ordered them to lay down facing the blackboard at the front. He got the Ziploc ties that he bought earlier that morning, tied their ankles tight together so they couldn't get up and run. And then he started barricading himself in. He had 2x4s, he had lumber, nails, he barricaded the door shut, he pulled the blinds down inside and barricaded the windows on the inside. So about that time, 15-20 minutes later, the police arrived after the 911 call, and then he gets very agitated. They try to talk with him through bullhorn, and we think that it probably surprised him that the teacher ran. Our guess is that he probably didn't expect that would happen, and so he became agitated. He called his wife, said he's not coming home, that he left a letter at home for her to read, and letters for the kids, which he did. And then he called 911, and he said, if these police don't get out of here and vacate the premises in a couple minutes, I'm going to start shooting. And he soon did after that. We know from some of the things he brought in that he apparently planned to assault someone sexually. We don't know if it was the teacher or the girls or what, but when the police stayed and didn't go, then he methodically just started shooting with an automatic pistol. These girls are on their stomachs, facing the blackboard, just down the road like this, shooting right into their backs and into the back of their heads. In a matter of 15 or 20 seconds, just boom, 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 right, just like assault like that in a rapid fire. The moment he started shooting, the police started to come into the building, but they couldn't get in because he had it so well barricaded. Eventually, they broke into a window, and when he saw them coming through, they turned a gun on himself and shot himself. The police called in helicopters, medevacs. At one point, there were like 15 helicopters in the air above this schoolhouse. This is out in the very rural countryside. And they took the children out, loaded them onto the medevac helicopters. Some of them went to CHOP in Philadelphia, some down to Newark. There's a trauma center there, some to Hershey, some to Lancaster. And so these 10 young women were scattered in 5 different regional trauma centers. And the shooting took place about 11 o'clock in the morning. And the Amish community, of course, learned quickly that it was happening because when the teacher ran out to call 911, and so they came and really, Amish people assembled at the farm about a quarter of a mile away because the police had cordoned off all the roads coming into the school just to keep bystanders and other people out. One of the complications was that the Amish parents didn't know, the boys, because the boys got out, they knew who was safe, but they didn't know about the 10 girls if their daughter was dead or alive. And furthermore, they didn't know which hospital their daughter was in. And when these kids arrived in the hospital wanted identification for them, but they were all dressed the same, basically. They had no ID information on them. And then the hospital asked for photographs and the state police by this time are there. They set up an emergency center, and they're talking with the hospitals, but the Amish didn't have any photographs to send. And so for many of the families, they didn't know where their daughter was until that evening. And in one case, Amish couple, had a neighbor that brought them down to Newark, thinking their daughter was there, only to find out that she wasn't. So they had to drive back up to Hershey, arrived there like 2 a.m. Discovered it was their daughter there, and the doctors are recommending they take her off life support, which they did. By early Tuesday morning, 5 of the girls were dead, and the other 5 were fighting for their lives in the trauma centers. And the doctors were not really optimistic that some of the ones that were alive yet would actually survive, because they had been shot in the back of the head, you know, through the back. It was just a very traumatic scene. It turns out that all 5 who were living did survive, and 4 of those are able to function very well and live a fairly normal life. Some of them have had several surgeries. The one in particular, because of her shoulder, had been shot into her shoulder, and but she's able to function very well, and you don't really see externally issues with them. The one, however, is basically in a vegetative stage. She needs 24/7 care. They try to communicate with her. Sometimes she's responsive, but they're not really sure what she knows or what she understands. And so it's a sad situation, because she really hasn't improved a whole lot and is pretty much plateaued. The one question I'd invite you to think about tonight is, you know, this event was a surprise. This is a quiet, idyllic countryside. This is not Detroit. It's not Philadelphia. It's not New York or Atlanta. I mean, it's quiet, beautiful, idyllic Amish countryside. And so this was a shock. And one question for us to ponder is, how would have we responded to an event like this? If these were our daughters, or our sisters, or our nieces, or in my case, my granddaughters, how would we respond? What would we do in a shocking situation like this? What is remarkable about this story is that at 6 o'clock that evening, this is about 7 hours after the event, in Georgetown, 3 Amish men who were not representing the church, but just who also lived in Georgetown, knew the Roberts family. By the way, Charlie was picking up milk from a number of Amish farms, so that people knew him. And some of the kids knew him when he walked in that morning, because he picked up milk in their farms. 3 Amish men said, you know, we ought to really go over and talk to Marie. This is his widow, Marie Roberts. And so they went over to her house, and no one was there. And then they said, well, probably she's over at her parents'. And her parents lived 2 houses away from the firehouse, which is a sizable one in Georgetown, which the state police used for a whole week as their command and control center. So they went over there, and sure enough, she was there. They went in, and they basically told her and her parents, and her father owned the trucking company, the milk trucking company. I mean, he owned a company that had a variety of trucks that would bring milk in. Basically said, we want you to know we're not going to hold this against you, and we're not going to retaliate. We're not going to do bad things to you. We want you to keep on living here. We want to be friends, and we want to be neighbors. And they offered gracious words like that, words of forgiveness, that we're not going to hold this against you and hold bitterness against you, and we want you to still stay and live here and be our neighbor. About the same time, and unknown to these 3 guys, about 5 miles away, A similar thing happened at Charlie Roberts' parents' home. Charlie Roberts' parents lived near Strasburg, about 5 miles away. His father was a retired police officer. And in his retirement, he would provide taxi service for the Amish when they needed transportation. There are a lot of people in Lancaster, non-Amish people, that do that for Amish people in Lancaster County. And so one of his clients, an Amish man who used his taxi service, and another one came to their house, knocked on the door, and came in. Since this event and since working on the book, I've learned to know Charlie's mother quite well. And so what I'm about to say comes from her. And she said, Jacob came in, he hugged Chuck, which is Charlie's father, her husband, and he said, he held him in an embrace for an hour. And she said, I gave him a towel and it was wet, soaking wet at the end of that hour. She said, Jacob just held Chuck and said, Chuck, we love you. Kept telling him, we love you, and we're not going to hold this against you. Terry, his mother, said, Chuck's wife, said, Don, we call Jacob our angel in black. And she said, when he walked through the door, hope came through the door. You can imagine how this tragedy would have broken a mother's heart. She homeschooled him. She homeschooled him. She knew him very well, her son. And the shame and the embarrassment and the horror of this kind of event, if this had been your son or your daughter doing something like this, it's unthinkable. But she said when Jacob walked in, when our angel in black walked in the door, hope walked in the door. It was the first symbol of hope for these parents who had such broken hearts that day. I'm going to stop at this point and just see if you have a few questions about the event. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but if there are questions you have just about the event, then after that I'm going to move on and talk more about the nature of Amish forgiveness and also why they forgave, and also a bit more about what forgiveness is and how we can think about it and define it. Yes?